Welcome to the God is Not an Asshole podcast. If you are one of the many people done with religious dogmatism, hang on. You might sense transcendence, but your church or other faith community never seem to get off the ground. You realize that honoring your conscience means more than fitting in and keeping hard to explain rules? Hang on. You could probably think of the goodness in your tradition, and you tried your best to save that baby, but there's so much bathwater. Join your hosts, David Norman Moore Jr. in California and Carrie Connolly in New Jersey, who are collaborating to bring on guests who have found life on the other side of fundamentalism. Guests with stories of how they have liberated themselves from beliefs that divide us from each other. None of our guests' narratives are identical, but we hope you'll find something in common with each of them. We invite you to experience our common bond as we all inspire even more of us to embrace the true self.
Hey, everybody. Carrie and I are delighted to have you today tuning in to us. Today's guest is Dayna Eng, who is a queer Asian American graduate from Fuller Theological Seminary's MFT, Marriage and Family Therapy program. They are in private practice, serving currently in the Bay Area, especially BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, trans youth. And gosh, one of the things that we do, as if you listen to God is Not an Asshole, is several of our guests have attended conservative Christian educational institutions. And we're hoping that we can be contributors to their reform. If they're going to exist in the future, they're going to need to catch up. Anyway.
You mean the reform of the institutions, not of the people?
Yes, of the institutions. The institutions are going to need to come into the real world. So Dayna likes during their downtime to hang out with their partner and kids and dogs and whoever else will have the privilege of being in their company. Tell us about yourself and your journey, please, Dayna.
I don't even think I prepared an elevator pitch. So I'll give you a snapshot of where I am now. Right now, I'm in my home. I live in the Bay Area, as you mentioned. I do see clients in the Bay Area in person, and I also see clients throughout California virtually. So it's quite an honor to be able to reach that far.
Nice.
Amazing. Yeah, I have two kids, and I have two kids half-time, one dog half-time, and one dog full-time. And I live in this home with my partner. And what else is there? I
know you like reading YA literature.
Well, there are ways to cope with, end stage capitalism and just ongoing genocides, and that's my way of coping. My partner goes the other direction, is reading like Noam Chomsky on Palestine, Angela Davis, and I'm like, fluffy queer YA, please.
Yeah.
So we both cope in different ways.
I would choose the fluffy, as a little escapism as well, I think.
Yeah.
I would love, there are a few things that I'm excited to chat with you about, but since you already brought up the cheery subject, why don't we dive into how to survive this day and age of, not that it's much different from previous days and ages of Holocausts and genocides,
sure.
But this is the one that we are specifically living in. And I know for me, I have a sense of, I was thinking about this just today as I was sitting in my chair, having my quiet time this morning, and thinking about, I care so deeply about what's happening in Palestine. And I also feel the rage that is doled out by a lot of people on social media that say, if you're not enraged, if you're just sitting there doing nothing, then you suck, because how can you just sit there and and drink your coffee while this is happening? And I'm like, my question is always like, I don't know how to respond to that. Like, am I a crappy person because I'm enjoying a moment with my coffee while this horrific thing is happening? I don't know how to
Mm.
balance those two things.
That's a great question that cuts through a lot of layers, right? Because
Mhm.
macro and micro, right? I guess it's micro and macro. There we go. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't have an answer for you. I can tell you how I cope. I can tell you how my partner copes. And I
Mhm.
can tell you how I show up in the room with clients who are asking the same things. Social media wise, I try and avoid it. You can't always, but because my job is the way that it is, and I sit with folks and I hold space, I cannot doom scroll for my own health,
Mhm.
my own mental, physical health,
Mhm.
spiritual health, right? My partner, on the other hand, as I mentioned, like digs in deeply, feels deeply, and is like, I need to witness this. People are turning
Mm.
away, and I'm not going to do that. And so, actually, the tension comes up in our home where she needs a partner in that, and I can't be that. So that's where it
Mm.
shows up for me. And so I'm like, okay, you do the things that feel generative to you. I'll be here. I will support you, and I will do the laundry. Like just the menial tasks that
Mhm.
Mhm.
keep the day going. So that's a
Wow.
Yeah.
little micro of survival.
You know what? You
Yeah.
mentioned something, Dana, that I hadn't even given thought to, but it makes all the sense in the world. People who are seeing you as a therapist, are living in the real world and dealing with the kinds of things that Carrie just mentioned, and yeah, they need support
Yeah.
in doing this. What does that look like?
Well, I am very blessed with the clients that I get to work with. I always say this throughout my career. I work with the greatest clients in the world. And they come in and they have their issue of the week or the thing that they want to talk about. And then just like everybody else, we're parallel processing what's happening during the height of pandemic isolation. We were parallel processing what it meant to be siloed and isolated. And like I was as well. So it's kind of an ongoing trajectory of that. So I guess to your question, folks come in, they have their stuff, and I hold the space and I witness and I validate and I try and reflect back what I'm hearing and check in and see if that's right. And sometimes I'll be able to, I don't know, elicit different themes or themes from the past, depending on how long I've been working with these clients. And it's a real honor and privilege to be able to do that. And then when we come to those big picture issues, I think about grief. I always think about grief. And so I'm like, okay, let's go to our stages of grief. What stage are you in when you're really irritable toward yourself? What stage are you in when you're just trying to like zone out and play your video games? What stage are you in? This, that, and the other thing. And then identifying those stages helps to identify what tools we can use in that stage.
Mm.
So that's my therapist hat. Yeah.
Can you go back to the micro and macro level? Because I think
Yeah.
you kind of talked about the micro, maybe, as in,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
if I was
In my home,
understanding it.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So, what would the macro? Yeah, finish that thought. Because
I don't have a really great answer for that, honestly. My partner is doing some really wonderful artistic things, creating these beautiful bookmarks with like quotes and poetry on it. And I'm like, I just love that you're doing that. And that is not something that I can do. But things that we do that go out into the world is how I view the macro, how we understand our interaction with our surroundings, our communities, our wider circles. And for me, it's probably based on the kids. So I have two kids, a middle schooler and a elementary schooler. And so explaining to them, understanding myself what's going on to the degree that I can explain it to them in an age appropriate way, that helps me sit with this point in history that we currently find ourselves.
I want to thank you,
Mm.
first of all, early in our talk here, that for doing what you do. And I know that you don't need thanks because you see the need and you are drawn to it. But to be with trans youth, BIPOC trans youth in their transition period, their move towards adulthood, such an important work. And I wonder, you're drawn to a young adult to YA literature, and I wonder if that kind of embeds you in their consciousness as you communicate with them.
I think what you hit on, David, there is more of a stuck point for me or something deeper for me. So in my youth, right? Like I don't think that I I don't think that I participated in was shown or exposed to literature representation that would have helped me in my journey. So that's probably where I go in my kind of escapism. And then it's also where I feel perhaps most passionate or most where I can connect with folks. My practice itself is focused on like BIPOC, trans, LGBTQ youth specifically, but my practice is wider. So I see folks across generations. And but yeah, I think I spent 4 years in the South Bay area working with an agency, and the primary clientele was LGBTQ youth. And because of where we were located in San Jose, majority BIPOC youth. So 16 to 25-year-olds, transition age youth is what the phrase is in the Medi-Cal lingo. Yeah, and I think that they're at this very interesting point. They're in transitions all over the place, right? And transitions are very rich. It's this liminal space where there's so much uncertainty, and finding stability in the uncertainty is an interesting thing. And I think that the folks going through these transitions, both across stages and, gender wise or in their sexual orientation, how they understand themselves, have so much wisdom to offer from trying to figure out how to stabilize.
I totally believe that there's wisdom, there's intuition, there is a capacity to observe that gets, largely overlooked by the larger population. Tell us how and how not you attended a conservative. You attended an institution that does not bless the identities, first of all, of yourself, but of the people that are your clients, many of them. What was that like?
I mean, it's ongoing, David. It's ongoing. I still interact with folks from my school. I have this beautiful group of, there are 5 of us, and we meet every month, and we are a consultation group. And we still are unpacking all our education. We're unpacking what we learned, and we're applying it to our practices. But I was young. I was in ministry since middle school. It offered stability, it offered community, it offered a party, right? My friends were in the band. I was in the skit team. It was just a whole thing. This is like late 90s, early 2000s. This is like, I don't know, big band. I don't know what it looks like right now, honestly, but that's what it was then. And I needed that. And I followed that throughout my college ministry. I was an athlete in undergrad. And so I was in the student athlete ministry. My best friends were, either on teams or very good at like even evangelizing. So it's sort of like just a fun party with the fun people. And it was countercultural because right in college, it's the college culture. So that felt good to my like Aquarius nature. And I was never politically conservative. So that helped, I think. But I was like, I wasn't interested in substance use. I wasn't interested in partying. And our parties were tea parties and board games. And it was delightful. But then I decided I applied for a couple of MDiv programs. And then I applied for the MFT to Fuller. I visited the campus and I felt very at home. Some of my family's in Southern California as well. And I went straight from undergrad. I always kind of was going to be a therapist. So I'm glad that was a good fit at the time. And there was no cognitive dissonance for me at that age because I was already politically left. And I found a lot of folks there.
How does it, how do you fit? If you're on the left, how do you move in such an institution?
Well, there's the divinity school and then the psychology school. And the psych school, I think by nature, you learn to not impose your values. So there was not a problem there, but they did have this integrative idea. And there were folks in my classes who were like, well, how do we deal with abortion? How do we deal with non-believers, right? I apologize for the term. And one of my professors said something great. I don't even remember which one it was. The professors were fantastic, but they said, you can't answer a question that hasn't been asked. And that has stayed with me this whole time. And I think it applies across.
Can you unpack that for a moment?
Sure. So if you're in a seminary and asking a question about how to be in a room with a client and how to quote unquote deal with the fact that they don't have the same religious beliefs that you have, the answer is you can't answer a question that they haven't asked, as in you can't meet them at a place where you want them to be and where they're not actually, which is your value imposition, right? So they had to drag some people. Honestly, my professors had to really broaden the minds.
That sounds pretty evolved.
Rather, my professors were fantastic, and I had a really special time there. I was not out to myself at the time, so again, there wasn't tons of cognitive dissonance. Although, interestingly, my roommate, my first year there, did come out to me as queer, and I had to then like unpack some of my own garbage, and we ended up having a lovely relationship of living together. And then, for whatever reasons, we moved on. But I do appreciate that sticky point in my life that really started opening some things for me and questioning, like, oh, well, you can love the sinner but hate the sin. It hurts to say these things. Like, y'all are bringing some really old stuff out in me.
Yeah.
Oh,
And I think in our email exchange there, we brought up another. I almost think about it as almost the last taboo, and that is ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. How do you approach that? It's because I'm fascinated by the topic. I'm fascinated by the topic, and I think it's evolutionary. In fact, there is a book called The Seed of the Soul. And in that book, they talk about how traditional marriage is actually a thing of, it's not going to be the thing that's going to move us into the future, but soulful relationships will move us into the future.
yeah, where people are contributing to each other's development, spiritual growth.
Right. Yeah. So, ethical non-monogamy for me, I'm sorry.
No, please.
Me, ethical non-monogamy. Yeah. I'm separated. I've been separated for a few years now. I'm currently monogamous with my partner, but I did have a period of practicing polyamory and ethical non-monogamy. And I found there's so much beauty in that model of relationship. And, but there is so much stigma and judgment. I don't think that there's a single friend of mine in my friend group who really understood. They all said, "Oh, it's just a phase." They called it like a phase. One person said, "It's just the thing that you do until you're on your way to monogamy." And even though I'm currently monogamous, that's not exactly what happened there.
Right.
Like that's not how that went. You know what I mean? And so I'm really curious to hear you and how you speak about it, how you work with clients about it, how you answer the world about it, all of those things.
Oh yeah, that's definitely different levels. So there's the personal, there's the professional, and then there's and the professional is sort of divided how I deal with like other professionals and then how I deal in the room. Again, I live in the Bay Area, right? So it feels like there's a lot of folks who have deconstructed structures and systems around them, either sexual orientation, gender, just institutional structures. It is a unique place. And I find that the clients that I see have at least had experience with ethical non-monogamy, polyamory. So it behooves me to be proficient professionally. And it's difficult when in that hat, when I'm trying to find resources, consultation groups, just even the dialogue to be proficient in the field and meet these clients where they're at. There's a great book, Polysecure, that I'm working through right now, and it's very attachment based. But I have other things that are exciting to me about how to be in relationship with clients who are in relationships that look different, and insights to bring. So I can like use all the old stuff that I've been using, right? Or I can integrate things that I think fit really well, but there's no ground there. So it feels a little lonely. And I recently asked So I've done some training in this theory, restoration therapy, and I really like it. I think it's really salient, and I think it's affected my practice and my clients in a very positive way. And I asked them, the trainers, if there is any dialogue around it, any other professionals that are interacting with this or curious about this, having conversations, and it was immediately shut down. There's no interest.
What's
Nobody's
up with
talking about
that?
it.
Because,
These
and
folks
what I
are
don't understand about that is that there are like the response is so complete, and yet there are so many people. I mean, you can do a Facebook search of groups, and there are so many people in these groups. Like, this is not this is like the most overpopulated taboo I've ever seen.
absolutely.
Quote
And
taboo.
I think the thing that feels familiar about it is for folks who have experienced microaggression, when we over and over and over again say, we are in the room, like, see us, this experience is real. And that's when it gets to the personal. And
you talked about the conversation being shut down, and immediately I thought of 3 occasions in the past month where that happened with a conversation around Gaza, where it seemed to be a natural next step in the conversation, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're not getting into that today, or something like that. And it's just, it does seem disingenuous, and it seems weird, and it causes me to try to take these rabbit trails out to, where did that come from? Where, I don't know where it came from, and so it's very presumptuous of me to even ask the question, where did that come from? But it's almost like I can't help it, because this is right here in our face. It's right here.
right.
And so how can we not talk about something that is so manifest?
Right. And it's because you're coming up against something that the other person is uncomfortable with. Right. It's not about the question. It's not about you. It's not about the situation. It's about somebody else's discomfort.
So with ethical non-monogamy and the discomfort that comes up with that, I feel like it's such a deep and it's such a deep resistance to everything that we are socialized to believe in, from fairy tales on up, right?
Yeah.
And all of the
Fairy
media
tales,
that
definitely.
Right.
Oh, for sure.
That's
for
patriarchy,
sure.
right? Like, there's safety in the
And
patriarchy.
there is safety in the patriarchy, or
Isn't that great
presumed,
that
alleged.
think about that. They're called fairy tales.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Alleged safety, the alleged safety of the patriarchy. And as a white-bodied woman, boy, do I feel that, right? Because it's being one step away from the top of the privilege heap around
Right.
that.
And then it also gets into the white supremacy, like proximity to whiteness, proximity to patriarchy, proximity to power is power, but it's not. It doesn't keep you safe. But
Right.
Sorry, I
Right.
interrupted.
No, not at all. And I'm fascinated by the visceral reaction that people have to it. Like, it's almost borders on disgust, right? I would almost say that, right? That people, they get so passionately opposed to it, whether they're saying that out loud or not. Right.
Oh, absolutely.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is not the first time it's happened. This is a professional situation, right? And then there's the personal. So in my own story, it kind of sucks to be a stereotype, but I came out to myself late in life. I had my 2 kids. I was married to a white cis het man. I think we got married at 24. We were little. And then I realized that I was attracted to folks of the same gender, of different genders, of all genders. It was very confusing for me. And having been raised in like very conservative and evangelical spaces, it wasn't really a thing, because like once you partnered up, you stopped looking at other men as a perceived female-bodied person. And so that was fine. Like, okay, shut down, great. And then I didn't shut that same thing down when it came to women, to gender non-binary folks. And so it sort of was like this door that was left open that I didn't even know existed. And then when I found the door, it was like, oh my God, it's full of sparkles and rainbows. So when that all happened, I was talking with my former partner at the time, and we got to a place where like I could figure out a little bit more about what that meant for me. And so we opened up the marriage essentially. And that was very painful, and it was under a certain amount of duress. because I had met somebody. So
Well,
throughout
let me
that,
ask Dayna, before you go on, let me just ask, do you think, well, I'm obviously it's hard to know something like this, but had you known before the marriage and you proceeded with it, with that understanding, would things have been different?
that's a great question. I actually asked him that question in early days, and I don't think that either of us could have come up with an answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because for him, he didn't feel safe. He didn't feel like he could be vulnerable if there was another partner, another person. And for me, I didn't feel like I could be safe or vulnerable if the entirety of my existence wasn't able to be expressed or, I don't know, around. Right? I felt shut down, shut away, closed down. And that's so much of my experience. It's like a queer Chinese American non-binary person anyway, and that's something that I push against really hard. So I had this rebellion against being restricted.
And that's one part of your identity we haven't touched on. You know, Chinese American is a part of who you are. It is who you are. How does that play into? I'm going to ask two questions. All right. How does that play into who you are as a therapist and as a person in the world? But also, I want to go back to something that I know was uncomfortable when you said, what is it? This love the sinner, hate the sin, love the sinner.
Yeah.
Because the institution that you were a part of still holds to that way of thinking.
Yes.
And as you know, not long ago, there was a lawsuit that was brought against the institution because of its heteronormativity and its withholding of diploma, I guess, degree to when that happened, and the people, I mean, the institution won the case. What does that do to you, if you will, if anything?
I mean, I try and honestly keep my fuller credentials pretty quiet just because of where I am geographically and then also where I am in my life. It was a wonderful space when I was there. I have friendships that have spanned 15 years because of it. I'm deeply grateful for the time. But it is not it's not an institution that I recommend people go to. It is not an institution that I refer people to. It's something that I have done is in my past, and I try and contain it there. But it does have power,
and that's why I said if the institution has a future.
Oh well, I don't know about that.
Well,
I mean,
no, but I'm just suggesting that it's going to need alumni who recommended, and
indeed,
and supported, and if they can't, having alumni who are like you, that does not contribute to the future.
Yeah, and it hurts me to say that because there are still folks there that are really great at what they do.
Yeah. And that's another thing, Dayna, that I am curious about is how do you process the feelings? For any of our listeners, including myself, I know, I thankfully, I attended graduate institutions that supported my way of being in the world. And so that's not a problem so much. But I have been so connected to church life, to conservative church life. And even though I don't participate in it now, it's still part of my awareness, my way of being in the world. And sometimes I get triggered, maybe not so much with the saying, love the sinner, hate the sin, but there are other things that, and some of the things are legit. I'm triggered by things that are actually legit, but they were misplaced. They were abused, right?
Like what?
Well, I think that there's an argument for, there's a case that could be made for something like the word obey. That word just
gives me the shivers.
Actually,
something happens viscerally for sure.
But I can find occasions of using that term when you're talking about engaging your consciousness, following that which is larger than your consciousness, that kind of thing, because it's still you, it's still voluntary, right? But just hearing the word is like, no, that's okay.
Well,
I
when
think
you
there's
say it
value.
like that, I was going to say, when you say it
Go
like
ahead.
that, there's vulnerability there. Like you are opening yourself to the action of following what the thing is that feels right or feels like it's, that aligns with your values. And that's a vulnerable thing to trust yourself. It could be a beautiful thing. I don't think I would use the word in my own
No,
in my own everyday.
and I don't use the word, but it's just that I feel like I'm overreacting to something when someone is trying to communicate something that's very real and very true to who they are. But it's like I blank, my eyes glaze over, and I can't hear what they say next.
Right, and we come back to that thing that shuts people down. So that shuts you down. So that's very insightful.
Right. I think there's value in understanding the power of language and the fact that there are some words that need to fall out of usage for good reason, even though there might be some ways that we can use them that it doesn't mean that. But I still think that it's okay for us to have to require the mental exercise of learning new ways to say the same thing, right? Pronouns are a perfect example of that, right?
Yeah.
That if I'm going to care about somebody, if I'm going to truly be the good person that I want to be, and I want to care for somebody, then I can do the additional intellectual labor of trying to be careful about the pronouns that I use. That's a small thing that I can do to show somebody that I care about them, right? It's very small. Even though it may sometimes feel like a big task in my brain to do that, to practice agency over the conditioning that I've had, right? But some people hold on to that so tightly. And I'm like, what do you get from holding on to that so tightly? Right? That word obey, or, the pronouns that you think are most appropriate for somebody else, what do you get from holding on to that? What is it? Is it power? Is it security? Is it safety?
Yeah. The thing that I'm thinking of is that people can communicate something to me that is really beautiful. It's what they're saying. They're trying to, and I'm being bigoted, if you will. I mean, they are trying to say something. I can't even engage their humanity, is what I'm saying. And I need to make sure that I am free and vulnerable enough to hear what people are really trying to say and get past myself.
I think that loops back very nicely into the polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, because when you say the words polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, it elicits that shutdown response, that hold to tradition response, because whatever it means to folks. And I think it would be good to even define it. We haven't even defined it in our conversation.
I was going to say that was, yes.
Yeah. Well, folks use it differently.
Please do.
Like I recently had a client who was like, I like polyamory better than ethical non-monogamy as a word to use for their own relationship style, because they view all of the relationships in their life, even like non-sexual or asexual intimacy partnerships. So it could be like a friendship. It could be a friendship with additional intimacy that looks a little bit different than, I don't know, what may traditionally be looked at as friendship, but they view the word polyamory as encompassing that type of relationship style. And ethical non-monogamy, it's more about romantic partnership. It's sort of, that's why it's like the ethical piece of it. Whereas polyamory just means that love can look different ways. It's a little bit broader as far as my use in the room, unless folks tell me that they, use the words differently.
I think that's so important to define it, because I think one of the issues that I've had in having conversations with people about it has been, well, what does it actually mean? And so a lot of people have asked me to define it, and they've asked me to define committed relationships, right? They're like, oh, well, you're not in a committed relationship. And I'm like, excuse me, who are you to say whether my relationship is committed? Just because I can be in a committed relationship. I said, hell, I'm committed to you. We're not romantically involved, but I'm committed to you, So I'm like, how do you decide? Like, just because I'm in more than one committed relationship or was at the time doesn't mean that I'm less committed to those people, right? And so the way that when I was defining it to these people who didn't understand it, for me, ethical non-monogamy was sort of the umbrella term that I used to describe all sorts of relationships that were both ethical, meaning everybody knew what was going on,
right? Consent.
And non-monogamous, meaning like not strictly monogamous, but multiple partners in whatever way that could be. That would be a spectrum. And then for me, polyamory meant I kind of had a small definition of that, which was being in more than one committed romantic relationship. Excuse me. So that was kind of for me what that meant.
Yeah.
So I think it's important. The point is definitions are important and how people are defining it.
Yeah, exactly. To different folks as well, how they see it.
So that question just hangs out there still for me. How do we process the overreactions? I guess you might say the the triggers, and also the you being Chinese American, how that plays in just culturally to your being in the world.
Yeah, I referred to earlier being occupying all the social locations that I occupy, LGBTQ, BIPOC, at all the other social locations, right? So I've experienced microaggression. I know what that feels like. And I think similarly, as Carrie mentions, is sort of the last frontier of breaking down institutions. So we have to sort of go to the institutional piece to understand why people hold so dearly. Why do people hold to their institutions? Because it offers the illusion of safety, security, power,
community,
understanding of oneself, how one fits in, with other beings. And we also, something that's really important in our house is that we take romantic relationships down from the pedestal. So we value all relationships as equally valuable or, valuable in and of their own right. So like my best friend, we've been best friends for 20 years. And I would say she's the non-romantic love of my life. We've been through some shit together. We've deconstructed our faith together. We have had really difficult conversations about race together. We held each other and fought through the 2016 election together, not against each other politically, but she was very focused on like, why is Middle America voting like this? And I'm like, that's not exactly the whole story. And so people's responses, David, to your question, I think is bound up in their adherence and their grip on their position in the perceived hierarchy. So if we take romantic relationships down, if we don't think of like dating and then marriage and then children and then a house as the trajectory, as the goal to, for which to strive, then what do we have?
Well, we won't have capitalism. What are we going to do then?
Exactly. Where do I find my self-worth, my value?
But you're pointing to something, Dayna, that's that I never really got to in my thinking about it. And I think we could even tie this back into David's comment about Gaza and receiving the same visceral responses of resistance to talking about Gaza, is that when we begin to poke and prod at these institutions that we hold so dear, whether it's, the United States and Israel's complicity, whether it's the institution of marriage and romantic relationships, or whatever else, our faith, when you start to poke and prod and start to pull at those threads, you start to have to really answer some questions, tough questions about who am I in the world? Because if I'm no longer wife, or meaning somebody owned by somebody else, somebody's property, somebody's claim, right? If I'm no longer a member of this institution, if I no longer am this patriot Zionist, who actually am I? And what's the responsibility that I have to the world and to myself when I no longer can say, well, I'm going to do this because of that. I'm going to ignore the genocide because I'm a Zionist. I'm going to whatever because I'm a wife. I'm going to not do with this because I'm this. That's a heavy question.
And that's what people are uncomfortable with, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, I was in a conversation not long ago with some dear people, and it came up. I don't even know. Maybe even I said it. I don't know. But sometimes as you're saying, sometimes you're engaged with people, and it doesn't matter who is saying or thinking something. You become in that relationship. You are together, right? Uh, your humanity just begins to blend, if you will. But anyway, in that conversation, it came up that what's happening in Gaza is like a George Floyd moment. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we've been trying to say forever that the police are an unhealthy institution, especially as it pertains to African Americans. We've been saying it. And to some people, it's like, when are you going to get over it? Ad nauseum, and then finding excuses to justify that brutality. And
Mm-hmm.
then, so to me, exposing exposing the occupation right now is saying to the world, wow, everything, our whole world, our way of being and looking at the world is being challenged right now. And so there's something beautiful on the other side of all of this. It's just so tragic that it takes so much, so much death, so much bloodshed and poverty and starvation to get us to that
I
point.
think that's a really valid point, David. And I also think that it's one of the reasons that it's really hard to look at, and I think it's very specifically because it is that the state of Israel, who has always identified itself with Judaism and Jews, who have been this historically horrifically oppressed victims of genocide themselves, right?
And democracy.
Right. But what happens is that we're looking at ourselves now and seeing just how human we could become, right? Because the response to this traumatized people to want to obliterate another human being that is perceived as a threat is a very human response. It is a bioneurological response, right? It is a very human response. I am not justifying Zionism or the Zionist apartheid state that Israel is, but what I am saying is that they are using the Jewish people and what they have been through as this shield, and their trauma as the shield, right? And it's a human response to want to look at. It's a very base response, but it's a human response to want to look at somebody that you have perceived as hurting you and going, I'm going to smash you to bits. I'm going to annihilate you. And they are capitalizing on that. Yeah. And that is a disturbing thing because we can see ourselves in that. We may not want to admit it, but we can see ourselves in that.
So
and that's terrifying, I think.
I was actually too looping in Dayna's experience as queer Chinese American, looping in all of that all the stress fractures that have been there for forever. They don't only apply to Zionism. They apply to our perceptions of reality and our false righteousness around those things.
And this is where I go to grief to understand the framework of what is happening. Grief has its stages, right? There's depression, anger, bargaining, denial, acceptance, and meaning making, and also ethics. Like when we view ourselves as the center of the world, and then we view ourselves in relation to others, and then we view the we as the entity moving forward, and knowing that collectively we have more healing, more power, more care as a group, right? So that's where the breakdowns happen for me when I think about Zionism, when I think about the genocide in Gaza, when I think about the response to the perceived aggression. And these lenses are what keep my heart rate from blowing through the roof, right? I notice as you go through just talking about what's happening in my body and my own grief responses, my own anxieties coming up, and the ways that they've shown up in my past as well, which then goes to David's point about the social locations that I occupy. So being Chinese American, being just racially discriminated against in my youth or today, or like when, COVID, was doing a lot of like anti-Asian, anti-Chinese racism, and the response of like pushing back or defensiveness, and then needing to self-soothe and be like, okay, I'm trying to understand what's happening, and this is beyond what my system can handle right now. So what do I need to do in this moment to regulate and be able to be in integrity with my values in the next step that I make forward? So that's where we go to the micro for myself. Again, on the macro, I have no idea. Systemically, I have no idea.
It's not easy.
I, to the best extent that I can, can really appreciate the experience. I was in a lot of fora, and I have quite a few people in my intimate circles who are Asian and Asian American and Chinese American, who during COVID, it just seemed so irrational. Some of these things you could find on social media, and to me, it was just mystifying. There's no logic, there's no rationale behind it. But as Carrie was saying, humans do stuff like this. And so we have to interrogate ourselves constantly to make sure that we're living out our humanity. In this particular moment, I see illusions, light shining on illusions around gender and sexuality, along with all of the images that are going to be tested. Myself as part of Pan-African nations. To me, what is happening in Gaza is happening in the DRC, is happening in Haiti. It is happening in Ethiopia. I mean, it's the same thing that's happening. And essentially, they are the same perpetrators, ultimately, who are causing this to happen. And so for me, it's like hope. It's hope. And this is why I spend energy and time in solidarity with Asian people of Asian ancestry, people who are queer, and especially in this moment with people who are Palestinian and Muslim. And just this past week, I went to iftar at the invitation of a local imam. And when I walked in, he said, "Everybody here knows you already." And what he was talking to us, he had gotten a hold of a YouTube video of me making a presentation to our community about Palestinians, and he shared it. He sent it to his congregation, and and so they were all upbeat about me, and I appreciate that. But really, it is self-preservation that is motivating me to do this. And I say self. I don't just mean me, but I mean my family and Pan-Africans, and then ultimately humans. That humans we're on the brink. When you talk about the environment and climate change and all of this stuff is produced basically by the same idea and ideology.
Yeah.
What does that elicit from you, Dayna?
It
As a
brings
Chinese American, especially.
I went straight to my book self, my therapist self. It brings up this graphic. You may have seen it. I'm going through Decolonizing Therapy, the book, and there's a graphic that just shows the interlinking of the exploitation of peoples, of the planet, natural resources, and how it all fits within capitalism, colonization, and the human cost, right? The cost of humans as commodities and our humanity in that. But that's where it goes first. And then when you ask me where it goes toward my Chinese Americanness, toward my queerness, it's the body that responds, right? So I feel it here. I feel it in my chest, a little ringing in my ears. And I was encouraged when you said that you're hopeful. And I was like, where does that come from? That piqued my interest. So David, where does that hope come from?
I think maybe I think some of it is ancestral.
Mm.
Yeah. And yeah, I think some of it is ancestral. I still have faith. I still have Jesus as a model. I also integrate my faith with a lot of other thought. So, you know, I'm an unfaithful Christian, I guess you might say, if you want to use that
Mhm.
kind of pejorative label. But I take whatever I can get. And so if it's the Tao, you know,
Mm.
if it's Kabbalah, if whatever it is, if it Ayurveda, I mean, all of this stuff
Mhm.
has a place as I'm exposed to it where I need it. If I can
Mhm.
use something from this buffet, I'm going to take it, right?
Yeah.
Mhm. When you were speaking, David, earlier about the different places that genocides are happening, what was sticking out to me is the inherent anti-blackness. Um, in just that, we're hearing all of this stuff about the horrors in Palestine, but the only places that I'm hearing about the horrors in Sudan, the Sudan, or some of the other places that you mentioned are from the Black creators that I follow on social media, because the main media is not talking about that at all, and that just drives home that
Yeah.
anti-blackness is a very real thing. So when
So
we start
real.
talking about the racial hierarchy, and we go from with white at the top of that racial hierarchy, blackness is all the way down at the bottom, and yeah.
So then it becomes Black people's fault that we can't have, a stable government in Haiti. It's
Right,
it's
right.
it's like, why
All your
is
fault.
that?
Yes.
Maybe it's just the
Mhm.
way Asians are.
Right, right. Yeah, very frustrating.
Wow.
Dana, how
Mhm.
can people find you as we close out our hour? How can people find you and your practice?
Oh,
Because I think I will say that
yeah.
I think it's so important. You fill such a very important need, and I just want people to be able to find you.
Yes. Well, my website is therapywithdayna.com. Dayna is spelled Dayna. And that is basically just the way you can send me a message and read a little bit more about what I'm about. Yeah.
Awesome. We will link that with the show notes for sure
And
here.
as we close out, Dayna, would you say something to the Dayna, if you will, who is now studying at Fuller here in 2024? Would you say something to them?
Oh, man. um, I think find your people, take what serves you, and be gentle with yourself as you go,
Hmm.
Mm,
probably.
I like that. Find your people. What was the second one you
Take
said? Find
take
your
what
people.
serves you and
Take
be
what serves
gentle with
you.
yourself as you go.
I love
Hey,
that.
everybody. We've been with Dayna Eng, and I hope you who are listening right now will find your people, that you'll take what serves you. And please, by all means, today, be gentle with yourself.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are people who have left behind performance-based religion and the shame that comes with it. Maybe you have a personal liberation story to tell, and we want to know about it. Please contact us on Twitter at God is not an asshole, or text 805-703-8393, because the world needs to know that God is not an asshole. The show's music is composed by Christian Moore, show art created by Evan Kerr, and the episodes are produced by Josh Perez.